Got it. All right. First off, I am a commissioner within the Reimagining America project. Several of you know some of the key players. There were a couple of people who responded that I don't see on the call, but I know they come obviously to hear the Reverend Dr. Rodney Sadler. He is a great speaker and very well at inspiring people to action. Unfortunately, I'm not as good as he is. So please bear with me as I try to go through this. This is his project in conjunction with Mayor Roberts and the rest of the team. So I will speak a little slower than he does, but hopefully we get the message across. So again, thank you. I'm going to give you an overview of the Reimagining America project. I'll give you a definition of what it is, who our members are, and how we operate. And at the end, where do I see things going in the future? So let's start off with just a little bit of a quiz. So who said this and when? Anybody know? No guesses? None?
Arthur Griffin.
Say that again?
Arthur Griffin.
No.
Betty White.
Absolutely. In 1954. So she was a transcendent personality. Was very sorry to hear of her passing. But again, this is how you create change. She decided, I will give up my show before I get rid of a key person within my organization. And we asked that question, how many folks will do that? So here's the second one. Who gets the job? Now, some of you may know these names, some of you may not. But I listed a few things about these individuals. They are both football players. One, I'm sure you know and have heard of. The second, maybe not so much. But the key point I want to bring out here is that Colin Kaepernick was vilified for expressing his opinion about how he thought America was functioning. Never broke a law, never arrested as an adult, and actually was given a team award for inspiration and courageous play, named after one of the original 49ers who happened to be white. However, Antonio Brown has a litany of violations, some of which involve the law. And it was so long, I couldn't put them all here. But here's the thing. Colin Kaepernick has been played since 2016. Antonio Brown just quit on his team at the beginning of the year. Yet they are still talking about hiring him for next year. Now, why is that? Why do you think that people are going to hire Antonio Brown and will not hire Colin Kaepernick? Well, keep that in your mind as we go through some of the things we're going to talk about today. So, some other questions. Have you ever, and you can read these, so I'm not going to read them to you, but I look at it and I see some things that I've heard people say. It was with good intent. I didn't mean anything. Or I've heard people say, get over it. This happened to you, get over it. Let's move on. Or how about, oh yeah, that's happened to me too. Well, if you're not a person of color, I doubt if it's ever happened to you too. And the last one is that whites have earned what they have, rather than acknowledging that it's the extensive white privilege and earned advantages that they receive that place them where they are. There's always that statement, can you walk a mile in somebody else's shoes? I doubt very seriously that anybody who looks at a person of color and says that I could walk in their shoes. Now, there's a few that can, but I think most cannot and do not understand the things that they've gone through. Now, from my own life, I learned about racism at the tender age of 9 years old. Now, my parents used to travel the country playing a card game called bridge. And that was very unusual for a couple of African Americans. But we would stay in hotels and they would go play and I'd be there by myself. And I learned about race when I was sitting in the hotel pool and watched two neighborhood white kids climb the fence, come over and sit down, take off their clothes, and got in the water. And they swam up to me and they said, "Are you American?" And I said, "Of course I'm American." And they looked at me and the oldest one said, "We can't swim here." And took his little brother, got out of the pool, climbed back over the fence. And that struck me. You couldn't swim here because this wasn't your pool. You weren't a resident, but that's not what they were speaking. They were speaking they couldn't swim because a Black kid was in the pool. And that's when I first got an understanding. So let's talk about the Reimagining America Project, Truth, Reconciliation, and Atonement Commission of Charlotte, North Carolina. The mission that you have is to call account to the history of racialized oppression in Charlotte, and then to foster, through testimony, witnessing, and atonement, measurable systemic change that will end racism permanently. So the key here is we're not going to just talk about it, we're going to do something. And that's why I got involved. There's enough people talking about what's wrong. What's your action plan to change it? So we're led by several key people within the community, the Reverend Dr. Rodney Sadler. Key point for him is that he's professor of Bible Studies and director, the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation at Union Presbyterian Seminary here in Charlotte. We have the former mayor, Jennifer Roberts, who I believe is actually on the call. And she currently works as director of the Path to Positive Communities program with Echo America, a national nonprofit working to build institutional leadership, public support, and political will for climate action. Others include Dr. Mark Gopin. He is director of the, I keep forgetting, I'm not going to lie to you. I am acronym illiterate at times, but it's about reducing change or reconciliation and determining change. I'll have to look it up. But the key here is that he pioneered projects in Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, Palestine, and Israel. He is kind of like our Yoda. He's the one that comes and tells us how we can actually facilitate dialogue that creates action items that creates change. Another member is his wife, Crystal. Now, Crystal is a person who does all the behind the scene works. Dr. Gopin has a lot of times he's requested around the world. He travels a lot. Crystal is the one that makes sure that the changes or the programs that are developed actually get implemented. And it's through her that we have a direct connection with local governments to figure out how to present the ideas and the information that we uncover through the actions that we're at. Reverend Dr. Sheldon Shipman, he is pastor of Greenville Memorial, and the key there is that it is known as a Freedom Church. It is the church of Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Paul Robeson, Booker T. Washington, and Harriet Tubman, all of whom were change makers in the United States. They are people who understood that things had to change for people to get better. And Reverend Glency Redrick, and she leads a bereavement ministry and facilitates an engaging weekly audit and Bible study class over at the First Baptist Church West. So how does RAP work? And this is the money question. The commission, of which the members that you just witnessed, is a collection of local and national leaders who are citizen activists functioning with democratic, small d, authority to call the Charlotte community and then the country to account for their history of racialized oppression. It is the movement of leaders convinced that the time has come to foster systemic change, and we can no longer wait for others to do the work that needs to be done. How do we do this? The practice is a ethical system that's meant to heal our society. Truth, reconciliation, and atonement are ethical practices with a long spiritual history in the great wisdom traditions and religious traditions. And that's why we have a number of reverends and members of the religious community that are on our board. That's where truth, reconciliation, and atonement originates from. Here are the practices that make this distinctive in the execution. The whole truth of the past, the present, and the realistic ethical transformations of the future society will be fully explored. We look at the past to learn, evaluate the present to see where we are, and how do we create the future that we want. The practice of confession and witnessing is both painful and liberating. And I cannot understate that how painful it can be to go through confession. Many of us have done that as we practice our religions. And we know that as we sit or stand before our judger, that we have to be honest. And some of us don't do that because it's painful. But that's the only way that we can actually change the future, is through confession. State what we have witnessed or what we have done and allow it to pass from us. And let's move on to how we create the future that we want. The practice of the commission will be focused ultimately on building a beloved community of citizens. We can both embrace the past, but also learn to love and reconcile the present to arrive to the future that you want. The facilitation of acts of atonement is the ultimate practice of the commission, for it is through concrete forms of making right what was wrong that perpetrators and bystanders can be set free from the terrible mistakes of the past. Also, the vision of the future can change, the future change may not be achievable for 10 years. So this is not immediate. We have to understand that the change we want will take time, but there will be measurable steps. We will be measuring the progress, and we'll make sure that those progress steps are shared with the community so they can celebrate the changes that have come. Now, the commissioners, and I am one of the commissioners, we are comprised roughly of 30 people chosen from the Charlotte community from a different loci of power who are active civic, political, business, and religious leaders. We are charged to chart the direction of the commission. So we are the ones that say, okay, here's what we're going to address. Here's what we are going to do. Commissioners must believe in the mission and goals of the commission, be committed to the vision of fostering a community devoid of the vestiges of racialized thinking and identity-based injustice, serve on at least one committee for the commission, and be ambassadors of our vision in the larger community. Witnesses. So we have testimony, and the testimony comes from witnesses. And what the commissioners do is aggregate witnesses who will talk about the points specific to that particular program. They will present hearings to the commission so that we can document the manifestations of racialist thought on the community as a whole and on individual members of the community. Witnesses will consist of at least 3 varieties: historical witnesses, impacted witnesses, and confessing witnesses. So how do we, I'm sure some of you are saying, okay, I really don't get this about witnesses. What do they do? So impacted witnesses. These are people who have been affected by the racialized system. And so they prepare opening statements that succinctly state the impact of the race or racism or the racial disparity. They present a prepared statement before the hearing panel. Now, what we do is we have panels of community leaders to hear these presentations of the witnesses. And what they do is that they actually ask questions of the witnesses to have a better understanding or to provide clarity. And what they must do, the impacted witnesses must be willing to work within the guidelines of the commission to further efforts towards systemic change. Now, what I mean by that is that we must focus on change. We don't want witnesses who come and just say, this is bad. Well, we know it's bad, but how do we create a change that will affect us in the future? And they must be willing to work towards that. They don't have to have a solution. We're not asking them to solve the problems that they bring to us, but they must be willing to talk about what we can do to change in the future. Historical witnesses, they'll do a presentation of predetermined length that will establish the racial history surrounding the issue under discussion for the evening. For example, such witnesses might provide a history of housing patterns, school performance, access to healthcare resources, discriminatory policing, etc. in the Charlotte community. They will be subject to questioning by the panel also. And then the last is confessing witnesses. And these are the people that have been impacted and may have benefited from the racial tendencies within the community. And this could be they have benefited through jobs, through employment, through schooling, access to industry or to medical services, or having a lack of being confined to polluting atmospheres. What they must do is they must be willing to confess that history pattern or a pattern of race-based oppression has fostered disparity and that they have benefited from it. So, just to show you some of the things that we have done, and these are only a few. We've had, I believe, 8 commissions, and we have presented 3 on education, 2 on criminal justice, 1 on housing, 1 on healthcare, and 1 on climate change. And this is going to be the way that we're going forward. We will continue to look, see if we need to re-examine areas as we go through this. So the first one on education centered on administration. So we had the superintendent, who's in my mind, we had Elise Dashu from CMS, and they came and talked about the structure of the school system in Charlotte and how it has created inequities within our community. We had one on criminal justice. Now, the one that was before, I wasn't here, but I did see this one. And this is innocent until proven guilty. And that is the way many people view the criminal justice system. If you are arrested, they wouldn't have arrested you unless you are guilty. And we all know that's incorrect. Yet, how many of us, when we see a face, and say, oh, that person looks guilty? I know I've done it. And that's the preconceived notion that creates the bias, that creates the inequity within our community. The second one on education, Brave Voices. This is the one in which I was a co-chair of. And what we did is we brought the students in. And here was a chance for the students to talk about what took place in their communities. And now you say, how can they be a part of creating a inequitable situation? Well, they may not directly, but that still doesn't mean that they don't participate in it. These students came from accelerated programs. So that means that they had access to teachers and the resources that many of the other students didn't. And they understood that. But I don't know if they understood the impact that had on their fellow students not having access to the tools that they did. And so we talked about that. We talked about the things that, they confessed to the inequities that were there. We had, they talked about the history of the programs. We had Ross Dennis, and I can't remember Ross's title, but again, he's with an accelerated program here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system. And then we talked to one of the teachers who confessed that, yeah, he looked at these accelerated students as being better than other students, and therefore they got more attention. And that creates inequity. And the student that doesn't get the attention may be just as capable as one of these accelerated students. But because they never got an opportunity, they never get a chance to shine. And then our most recent one was on climate justice. And what was very impactful there was Ebony Lockett talked about the impact of living next to, I think it was a forge, but it was one of the factories here in Charlotte. And the fact that she would get up choking on dust and fumes every day. And that is just something, and we know that this is what happens. We know this through the change within the Crescent. We know this from Old Brooklyn neighborhood, that they took the residents there and moved them to the most unappetizing communities that you could find in Charlotte. That there they were before, whether you could feel that they had a prosperous life, they had a secure life. They had a life within a community that knew them and loved them. And you take them away from that and put them in a community that doesn't care about them, because that community cares about industry, not about human beings. And then the confessing witness was Mayor Roberts, who talked about the realization of what was going on during her administration. And realizing it doesn't mean that I didn't do anything, but it does mean that I saw it, and maybe there were some things I could have done before. So we're going to take a stop for a second. I want to take and play a clip for you. This is Judge Elizabeth Trosh. She was a confessing witness in one of our judicial hearings. And what I want to do is to play this so that you can see what she said when she was a part of one of these programs. Okay, I need to go. Before I do that, here we are. Well, this is where we're supposed to practice beforehand, so we make sure that we don't make these mistakes. Here we are.
Sound's not coming through, Kevin.
It's not?
No.
Okay. Hold on a second.
Introduce to you Judge Elizabeth
Got it now?
Trosh.
Yes, great.
Thank you, Yolanda. We did start at the Public Defender's Office together in 2002. And I just want to first thank you for giving me this opportunity to listen to the experiences of Christy and Brent in Arcavia's, and to deepen my own understanding of the racial harm that has been inflicted by a system in which I have been working. I'm a white woman who has worked as a gatekeeper for 20 years. And when I came into this system, with my own experiences as a white person growing up in a mostly middle-class home. I had my own beliefs about why I was able to become the first woman in my family to graduate from college and the first person to go to graduate school. I kind of saw this world as a world in which people who could just kind of like, you know, pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and with access to good education, unlock doors to opportunity. And when I started working at the Public Defender's Office, every day I came to work, almost everyone I represented, almost every single person in the courtroom, defendant, victim, witness, was a person of color. And all the stories that I had been told and that I held about why these folks were having these interactions with the criminal justice system didn't make any sense. It just didn't make any sense. That every single person there who happened to be Black was there because of some kind of personal failure or choice. And so over my 20 years working in the system, I've come to see and to understand that there are structures, including the criminal legal system, that hold inequities in place, and that the criminal legal system has been used and its processes have been used to effectuate the oppression of Black people. So I'm here tonight to confess that I have benefited from the construct of white supremacy, and that as a public defender and as a judge, I have contributed to, participated in, and perpetuated criminal justice policies and practices with deep roots in the legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, terror lynching, and convict leasing.
So I'm going to stop it. So I'm going to stop it there. Just because I just want to stop with that little statement that she made, because that's how she felt, that it was that impactful to her. And there's a couple of things that I want to share with you, one of which I found just completely astounding. And that is, we talk about the prison pipeline. Now, many of you know that the majority, well, not the majority, but there's 3 times as many African Americans in prison in Charlotte or in North Carolina than there are white people. But did you know that when they are convicted of a crime and sent to jail, they lose their right to vote? And most people say yes. But did you know that when they go to prison, they now count as part of the populace within that new community? So now the community goes up. They now have greater population than they would have if the prison didn't exist there. Yet, that gives them more money. And the prison provides jobs for the community. So there's a double dip there. There's a prison that's bringing people who may or may not deserve to be there, and they profit from that. Plus they get the body count. So they get more bodies in their populace. So when the dollars are divided up in the North Carolina General Assembly, they get more money. And I was astounded by that. And somebody just wrote it into the chat. Yeah, it's prison gerrymandering. It's basically expanding your populace for someone who doesn't even have the right to vote. So I always found that just so amazing that we live under those circumstances. All right, I'm going to move on to what do we do now? So that, we identify all these things, and yes, this is wrong, we don't like it, we need to change it. Well, here's where I take my stance, and I promote some ideas which we have not necessarily discussed within RAP, but I think really does speak to how we change the future. So we know that intelligence is traditionally viewed as the ability to think and learn. But one of the things that we must change is how we rethink and unlearn. Many of the things that we base our decisions on are based on inaccurate information. We've already talked about that. The fact that these rituals have been ingrained in us and very hard for us to get rid of. So sometimes we need to start reconsidering what we believe in. And that is hard because it threatens who we are. If you've been taught that you are smarter than anybody else by virtue of your social standing, it's very hard for you to give that up. If you've been told that some persons cannot ever be better than you because of their social standing, it's hard for you to give up, especially if you've benefited from it, whether you realized it or not. Now, for me, as an African American, I'm light-skinned, and there's racialization within the Black community. We as being light-skinned have always been looked on suspiciously, because there were times that, and it happened within my family, that some of us would pass as white. And because of that, whether we were actually considered white or not, but because we were so light-skinned, we were given advantages. We could go into certain stores. We could ride certain streetcars. We could have certain jobs that other dark-skinned Blacks couldn't have. And it takes a lot for you to give that up. For me to take and say, no, I'm not going to take that job because this person is better qualified, it takes a lot of strength to do that, especially if you're coming from a society which typically doesn't offer you those chances. But that's what we must do. We must question ourselves. And in questioning ourselves, we make the world more unpredictable. And we don't like unpredictability. One of the reasons why we are in the situation we are now with things like COVID is because it's too unpredictable. So let me just say it doesn't exist. And then I don't have to think about it. I just go about my business. I don't have to change what I do. I don't have to wear a mask. I don't have to look at somebody else and say, put a mask on before you come in close to me. I just go about my business because it doesn't exist. And it makes life easier. until the change of COVID hits you. Then you see all types of reassessment. But by then, it's too late. So what do? We have to start with individual rethinking. Develop the habit of thinking again. In my experience with the League of Women Voters, there was a person who will be unnamed that said to me that there were a certain class of people that always acted a particular way. And I said, how do you say that? And they said, because I've seen it. And I said, yeah, but you're not the same color as they. So can you tell me you've seen all of their communities? Have you seen all of their situations? Do you know all of the interactions of their family? It takes a lot to start thinking again. We have to calibrate our confidence. There's some people say it's not, Kevan Woodson, gets a lot done because I say things with confidence. But if you go through my head, I'm always questioning whether what I'm saying is correct or not, because I am a scientist at heart. And a scientist is always looking for what's wrong. Those that have been in meetings in which I participate, I say my contribution to the team is to look at what can go wrong, because that's what we need to focus on. If we just do things that seem right, then that's how you end up with a society you have right now. And we must invite others to question not only their thinking, but my thinking. I have no problem with somebody saying, Kevan, why are you thinking that way? Because that doesn't make sense to me, because I can't see all avenues. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about it. Let's find it. Tell me what you see that doesn't make sense to you. And maybe you're right. And maybe I do need to question what I'm thinking. We need to ask people better questions. Don't ask yes or no questions. Most of you that have been around in sales understand that. You never ask a customer a yes or no question unless you're trying to lead them down a path. If you're trying to find out what's going on in their head, ask them, how did you come to that opinion? What happened that made you formulate that opinion? Now remember, we don't ask why, because why is accusatory. Why is, what made you think something as dumb as that? But you do ask, how did you come to that opinion? There's no judgment in asking how. How'd you come up to that? It could be because I want to know how you came to that so I can learn from it and I can do the same thing. Approach disagreement as dances, not battles. My wife and I dance occasionally. She loves to dance, but she always wants to lead because she knows that I'm not a good dancer. So I accept that. I let her lead if I can. Because the point is, you learn something when you're not necessarily leading, but you're actually watching what's going on around you. Now you have a better understanding of the circumstances. This is not win at all costs. And another thing is have a conversation about the conversation. When you get done, when we have meetings, when I have meetings with senior Dems, when we're done, I said, tell me, what did you think? What did you think of what I presented? Or what did you think of the presenter? Tell me what your thoughts are. I don't assume that I know what they're saying. I want to know, what are they thinking so I can do it better, or whether I can say, nope, that didn't address this particular issue for them. Or maybe I can find an avenue of something we can do better. We need to start rethinking. And we need to do this collectively within our groups. Let's all brainstorm. There are all types of brainstorming activities. And the brainstorming is not about what's wrong, but it's how did it get wrong and how do we go forward so it doesn't happen again? And this is real key with your kids. It's real key with your kids. And I see it in many parents. They ask their child, why did you do that? What did you think would happen? Now they do say why, because that's reflexive. But it's, what did you think would happen when you did this? And the optimal question is, what could we have done better? What would have been a better choice? And that's where you find out people saying things like, well, that'd have been hard. Yeah, it is hard. But that's what we're trying to do, is hard work. Hard work is not easy. Hard work is hard. So don't avoid it. Let's do it. One of the other things, stop asking kids what they're going to be when they grow up. They don't know. When you were 10 years old, you know, were you like me? Oh, I was going to be a doctor. Because that was the epitome in my family. If you were a doctor, you made it. So I always said I was going to be a doctor. Nobody said I was going to be a sales exec. Not selling the things that I sell. No, they were just, but it's not that what you want to be when you grow up, but how do you plan to get there? What are the things you're going to do? And that's creating learning organizations. Figure out how we can teach each other so that they can teach each other. Abandon best practices. They may have been best practices, but the world has changed. The world is not the same as it used to be. So a best practice in the 40s, 50s, the 70s, and the 80s is probably not a best practice today. Take time to think again. So here's some key thoughts. You've listened to this presentation. You say, okay, well, that sounds good, but I don't think I have a problem. Well, privilege is when you think something is not a problem because it doesn't affect you personally. That's a huge issue. That is privilege. Just because it doesn't affect you doesn't mean it's wrong, and it doesn't mean it doesn't need to change. Here's an example. What does America with defunded police look like? Well, actually exists. Look at suburbs, affluent white communities. Look at Huntersville compared to Lord, you know, you get old, your mind doesn't work as well. Derrida, or look at Beatty's Ford and Tuckasegee. What do you have in those white communities? Well, you have health, housing, activities for youth. And these communities have lower crime rates, not because they have more police, it's because they have resources to support a healthy society, something to grow the society so that it better can handle the issues that it faces and not leave them struggling on their own. And now the last thing I say is, if you come up with a statement, I'm not a racist, the next thing you should say is, but racism is so ingrained in my society and culture that on some level, I definitely am a racist. And I mean to do my part to destroy the system of oppression that people like me have created and benefited from on a daily basis. Now, I'm not saying for you to apologize for being white. That's stupid. No one's asking you to apologize for the sins of your ancestors. But what we are asking is that you help dismantle the oppressive systems they built and that you still benefit from. We know that if you're Black in Charlotte and you go to a real estate agent and say, I have X amount of dollars and I want to buy a house, redlining doesn't exist anymore. Not in the books, but you know you will get steered toward a certain community. Now, because of who I am and the family that I raised, we always push back. I moved several times because of my corporate career. And every time they would say, here, you should look at this community. And I say, no, I don't want to look there. Here's where I want to look. And we always found a house in the community where we wanted to live. And what I asked, so we only had one real estate agent that we asked that could say why they steered us to the community they originally suggested that made sense. And therefore we appreciate it. But when we told this person that we wanted to live in a different community, they were very supportive. And we actually found a house at a price that we could afford in a place that we never thought we could live. So now, few things going forward. We need to learn how to change our attitudes. Now, there's a number of things that go on here in North Carolina. I'll share them with you in the end, but here's a couple of them. Drink from the Well. This is by Geeta Kapoor. She was supported in this presentation, which was in December, by RAP and several other organizations. Mark Gopin, he's forming a group called Bridging the Gap. Their sole purpose is how to close that ideological divide between those that have and those that have not. And so that we can begin discussions about how do we change the landscape. And I also want to bring a point to beloved community Greensboro. And this is something RAP has gotten involved with in the last 3 to 4 months. It was started by Reverend Nelson and Mother Joyce Johnson. And some of you may have been familiar with this. They are survivors of the 1979 Greensboro Massacre. As you can see here, there was a march and they were attacked by avowed Klansmen and Nazis. And it started out that it was just fists and maybe axe handles. But then all of a sudden, the Klansmen went to the trunk of a car, pulled out long rifles, and opened fire. 5 protesters were killed, 10 people were wounded, including Reverend Nelson. Now, although there was videotape of the incident, an all-white jury acquitted the KKK members and Nazis at 2 different trials, where the defendants claimed self-defense. Now, more than 40 years later, Greensboro has voted to apologize for the police department's role. But the reason I bring this up is that the Johnsons have met with some of the Klansmen. They decided we need to get beyond this. We need to break down the barrier. Why did this happen? And what can we do moving forward? Now, there was no confession made for the actions of that day, but the Klansmen did agree that it could have been handled better. That's a start. But what that's done is galvanized the beloved community of Greensboro to look at other actions in and around Greensboro that have existed for years and will allow them to create the change they want moving forward. And this is the Johnsons here, and this is them meeting with Reverend Sadler. And again, I think I've put the beloved community website here at the end. This is the YouTube video, so if you want to watch the videos of the hearings that we've had in the past, you can
Kevin,
find them here.
we can't see your screen.
Oh, excuse me.
You're not sharing your screen.
It stopped?
Uh-huh. After it never came on after the first part that you were showing.
Okay, thank you. Well, somebody tell me.
I'm somebody.
Yes, you are. All right. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. So again, I'll share the appendix with Suzanne and with Reagan. So if you're interested, you can take a look at that and take a look at that afterwards. Again, that's the Johnsons. Here's some of the other things I showed. Again, as I said, I'm not asking you to apologize. That doesn't do anything for anybody. The apology is appreciated, but what we need is to formulate plans for the future. Okay. I've talked long enough. I've lost about 10 people. But again, any questions, comments, concerns?
Kevin, it's Suzanne here. You never fail to disappoint. And I know that.
I never failed to disappoint. Okay.
Right. No, you did not disappoint.
Okay.
Sorry. God, got it just totally backwards.
That's all
Thank
right.
you so much for your talk. And I know you've generated a lot of great questions, and I'm going to go to the chat box because we asked people to put their questions in there. And I think the first one came from, let's see, wait, I had it from Shanda. Let's see. Shanda Martin. Shanda, can you ask your question? Because I can't find it in the chat.
I think someone answered it in the chat. So I don't know if you just want to have it again, but it was answered in the chat. Somebody was answering as we were going through.
Oh, they did answer it. Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
that was Mayor Roberts.
That was me.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. I have a question. I understand that the RAP Commission has plans to extend their efforts beyond Charlotte on a national level. Could you speak to this?
Well, actually, I won't because I am not on the board. But Mayor Roberts may want to say something. I know it's something we're looking at, but as of right now, we have not created a definitive plan as to take it outside of Charlotte.
Okay. Mayor Roberts, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. And Kevin, I think you just got yourself an invitation to be on the board.
No, you
Unless you don't want to be.
you asked me before and I said no. Okay.
Oh, all right. Too bad. So we have had connections with cities around the country who are working on truth, reconciliation, and racial healing. And they're just, Princeton actually is part of this. There's a group that's been talking for the last couple of years about the national bill to create a national commission on truth, racial healing, and transformation is what they're calling it. It was started by Barbara Lee. Cory Booker has a equal resolution in the Senate. It keeps getting more signatories, obviously not enough to pass in this very slimly divided Congress. But there are many cities that are working on truth and reconciliation. And Charlotte is listed, the Reimagining America project is listed on the new interactive map. I'll put a link in the chat that Princeton has put together. The Princeton folks have a bunch of great data scientists. And so they're also working with me on my Carter Center initiative, but they have compiled a list of all the places in the country where truth and racial healing is going on. It will be very inspirational for you all to see how many cities are doing the work. And what Kevin talked about is real work. It can be painful, it can be traumatic, but staying like we are is even more traumatic for so many people. So I will put that link in the chat. And one of the other things that we are hoping to do through George Mason and through Union Presbyterian Seminary is to come up with a curriculum, because those are both educational institutions, to have more groups able to follow the same methodology of the historic, impacted, and confessing witnesses, because of the healing, the creation of the beloved community, and the transformation that can happen. Of course, it also has to lead to policy change, but I'll put that in the chat, and we have been Charlotte's been part of that conversation for the national group for a while. We also have connected with a group in New Orleans that former mayor of New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu, put together to, again, bring people together across the racial divide. So that's where we stand. Charlotte's on the map, and we are the only city in North Carolina that's been part of this national process so far. But we know that Greensboro and Raleigh and Asheville and other places are doing the work as well. So we'll try to get them connected to it as well.
Thank you, Mayor Roberts. I have another question. Kevan, how will the systematic changes to racism be measured? You said that there would be measurement of this. What is the process or the?
Well, it depends upon which symptom we're working on. Okay, if it's healthcare, then obviously reduction in hospitalizations or visits centered around asthma. If we're talking about air pollution, okay. If we're talking about schools, it's a measurable increase in on-target reading and mathematics scores and students graduating on time. So there are metrics that are out there. The key is we keep focusing on the wrong metric at the wrong time. So if you're in the middle of a school year, it doesn't matter what the metric was last year for the students passing or failing. What matters is what are we doing right now to increase their learning, and we know that there are attributes that create that. And as much trouble as we've had over COVID, we've identified many of them. It's are the students fed? So they're not worried about eating? Do they have access to the internet so that they can study at home? Do they have a place to live? How many students are actually homeless? And we know this, but yet if we don't address it, then I don't care what we do, we're still going to see the same numbers. Those are those symptoms that create the problem that everybody wants solved, but we're not getting to the core cause. And the core cause could be jobs, it could be inadequate housing, it could be generalized pollution within the city of Charlotte, it could be just people don't care. And we need to change that.
Thank you. The commission states that religious traditions inform the desired ideals of your group. Is RAP considered a religious organization?
We are not a part of any particular religious organization, but we do adhere to religious values. And the values are of, support for a common man, to help your brother and help your sister, to not ignore someone else that's in trauma, to try to help them. Don't say that, too bad. As long as somebody is suffering, we're all suffering. So again, whether and we're multi-denominational. So, we're not adhering to any particular, and I don't like that word, but dogma. But the point is that all religions are centered around realizing a generalized purpose of uplifting man. And that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions in the chat. Would anybody like to ask Kevan or either Mayor Roberts questions? Anybody? I think you've been so good. Nobody has anything that's left unanswered.
Well, my only question would be, again, and this is for all of you, again, I sorely appreciate the efforts of the League of Women Voters. My question is, after you had a chance to to look at some of this, or maybe watch a hearing or two. How might you change? What might you do differently? Again, you're formulating a DEI program. How are you going to make yours stand out from the others and produce different results or better results? And that's just, it's just something to think about.
That's our path. That's where we're trying to head.
Okay.
Can I add? I want to add something. Our next hearing is going to be looking at the racialization of voting rights, which is very much in line with the League of Women Voters. And I just put in the chat, if anyone knows people, I remember hearing a woman talk about having to recite the preamble to the Constitution to vote under Jim Crow, and she did it. But I wonder if anybody has connection with any voters who've experienced voter suppression. Please put them in touch with us, because we'd love to hear their testimony. And we also have had people question, why should houses of faith talk about voting rights? And, what is it about that question about our faith, about the idea that every person is valuable and worthy of respect and dignity, which is part of our democracy and is part of every major faith tradition. And so the fact that we have voting rights being taken away goes against that basic core belief of how a democracy works the best. So anyway, those are some of the things that we'll be talking about. We don't have a date yet for the next hearing. We're aiming for sometime in March. But since the primaries have been moved to June, we may end up doing it a little bit later, but we're aiming for March at this point.
Just want to add something to what Mayor Roberts said, the interesting story of the person that had to recite the preamble. When she finished, she asked the question, did I get it right? What was the answer? Anybody?
The person, the polling.
No,
worker,
not you. You know the answer. Somebody.
They probably didn't know.
No, they didn't know.
No idea.
They could not say whether she got it right or wrong because they didn't know.
And Mayor Roberts, I put in the chat, but right now with these voter suppression laws in North Carolina being proposed, and I don't know which have been passed, those are very good examples of taking away, it's the racialization of voting rights, because it does affect the Black community more than any other. We need to educate people about what's going on. So I think that would be a very good, at least part of the program, to present that information.
Absolutely. Great point. And we will make sure we have somebody who is up to date on the latest legislation. Of course, the voter ID, we know, was overturned because they had asked the question, which documents are African Americans least likely to have? And they picked those documents to be the ones you had to have to register and to vote. So, that was pretty clearly thrown out, but there are other restrictions in terms of mail-in ballots, et cetera, that are taking place. And we will certainly have information updates on that.
And what about the restrictions in relation to people who are on probation? Am I not correct? Isn't that what Florida at least tried to get rid of?
Florida tried to get rid of it. They had not allowed felons and even felons who'd served their time to vote. They had I think it was a referendum where they said they should be allowed to vote.
Mm-hmm.
Then the legislature turned around and said, oh, but they have to pay all their fines, which is basically
that's what happened in Florida. But the question is, have we even gotten to the point of I don't think we allow people to vote, do we? As long as they're, we haven't even had the referendum in Florida. So I hate to say.
No, people can vote if they finish their term of imprisonment and finish their probation. Then they can vote. Yes.
But
the problem is that a lot of people don't know this, and they don't try to register, So
But the question is it, should they be allowed to vote once they are on probation? Isn't that what at least they were trying to do in Florida until, of course, the shenanigans happened?
Well, what they did in Florida was they added on, oh no, you finished your probation, but you haven't paid your fines. And so that was the add-on. So even though they had, finished their sentence, finished their probation, but they said, oh, then they changed it. Said, oh no, because you haven't paid your fines, you haven't completed your sentence.
Okay, I have the voter registration form in front of me, and here's what it says. Okay, I'm just getting to that part. I am ready. Okay, and number 4, I have not been convicted of a felony, or if I have been convicted of a felony, I've completed my sentence, including any probation. So you have to sign that, and that's on the voter registration form that we give out at all the naturalization ceremonies and elsewhere.
And that was my point. Aren't there states that people can actually vote once they're on probation?
Yes.
And isn't that something, wouldn't that make a huge difference in North Carolina?
There are states that can do that. And New York City just voted to allow non-citizens who are legal residents to vote in local elections, which is very interesting because they figure local elections, they're paying city taxes and they have businesses. Even if they're permanent residents, even though they're not citizens, they should have a say in how they're governed. Very interesting perspective in New York City.
I had a question. I'm not familiar with this here, but when I lived in Philadelphia, I was involved in an organization that helped homeless folks register to vote. And prior to that, there had been legislation that you had to have a residence that you could, of course, put down for voting. And so they would always say, well, if you don't have a residence, we're not even going to accept like shelter residents and whatnot. So they worked with the community, and then through advocacy, we were able to change that. And we would go into shelters and help people who, register to vote. So is that, if you're homeless, can you vote in this state?
Oh boy, I have a story about that.
Good.
I don't know if anyone remembers my first run for county commission in 2004. Bill James succeeded in getting 350 ballots denied because what the legislation says, I don't know if it's changed since then, it says that homeless folks have to draw a map of where they sleep at night. And what 350 people had done was use the Urban Ministry Center address where they get their mail as their residence. The Board of Elections recognized it did not comply with the law, and those folks had their ballots thrown out. And there had been a big push by Homeless Helping Homeless to get homeless folks to register, to have a say in local government, to feel like they were people again. And Bill James pretty much single-handedly got them thrown out by pointing to this obscure rule. And the challenge for homeless people is they don't want to draw where they sleep because they're afraid, there's a security issue with that. So it became a big debate back in 2004. I don't think that we have alleviated that for people who are experiencing homelessness.
The League of Women Voters Charlotte-Mecklenburg does a lot to register the homeless people on a regular basis. It's one of the things that we've been focusing on throughout the pandemic and, before that as well, but increasing through the pandemic.
Kate,
Great to hear.
you do a lot of registration. I don't know if Reagan is still here with us. She could probably answer this question, but do we know about the legislation now? Can homeless people register and vote?
I think that Reagan is not with us any longer, but I was under the impression that they had set up an address that could be used by the homeless, but that would have to be verified. I'm not positive of that.
I know that Reagan goes a lot to Roof Above and places like that to register people. So it would seem they could vote, but that was like a very sad story that Mayor Roberts told.
Well, on the voter registration form, again, that I have, and this is fairly new, it's changed since a year ago at least. It says, no physical address. If you do not have an address, use the space to the right to illustrate where you normally live or sleep. Write in the names of the nearest crossroads or streets. Draw an X on the map to show where you live or usually sleep. Then it says, important, you should also provide a valid mailing address above to permit the Board of Elections to send you a voter card. So, but I guess maybe if they're afraid to say where they sleep, this would be a problem, like you mentioned. But it is on this form, and this is definitely different than it was a year ago. It's more geared to people who don't have a physical address.
All right, folks.
Anybody else have any questions before we close?
I just wanted to ask if there's, Kevin, if there's specific areas that now, not just in generalities, but specific things that the group has identified that we, you know, that we need to get on board with if we want to be supportive.
Well,
At what point that happens?
the easiest thing is to attend one of the hearings. The next most involved is to become a part of our group. Come to one of our meetings and hear what we discuss as we plan these hearings moving forward. And the license that I took is we're working on what to do with this plethora of information that we've gathered, because we really haven't come up with a say, okay, here's the plan moving forward. We know we're going to do that. We plan to do that, but we're still gathering information. So what I offered you, which was taken from Adam Grant's book, Think Again, is to at least change your personal attitude. You know, that's a start. Change your own personal attitude. And once you do that, then the people, you know, your life's partner, your children, the people you come in contact with, when they say a judgmental statement, don't be afraid to question them on that. Why are you know, and again, why is easy. Don't ask why, because most people get really upset. But what happened to you to formulate that opinion? How did you come to that conclusion? Is there something that happened in your life that made you believe this to be true? And that's almost as bad as why. But you know, try to be non-confrontational, but don't let them get a free pass when people say some of the things that they do.
Kevin, excuse me, go ahead. I had an experience. I served for several years on the Women's Advisory Board for the Mecklenburg County. And well, our leader, who was a woman of color and just brilliant, made a statement one night that just really rocked my world. She said something about people walking in white privilege. And I thought, I've never heard that before, but it really made me think about, yes, we have privileges, we have benefits that we don't even realize that we do because of our color. And I went to several friends of color and discussed that. And it made me feel bad that I had never heard that or even thought about it. But so I guess this is sort of like a witnessing on my part, but
Yeah.
It stuck with me and still has.
Well, we're not trying to make you feel bad. Okay, that's not our purpose. Okay, but we do want you to understand. When my wife and I moved here, well, actually, it was actually more prevalent when we moved to Minnesota, and we walked into their more prominent mall and walked into a jewelry store. and basically was asked, why are you in here? And it's like, I'm looking for, you know, a ring for my wife. Oh, well, okay. Well, come over here and look at this. And you're making assumptions. And what really bothered me was that the person who said that to me was Black. It turned out he was the son of a city council person. And I remember playing golf with the city council person. He was talking to how great he raised his kid. And I said, you didn't raise your kid worth crap. Because he's assumed the personality of all the other people that are in the business that he's working with. And he was shocked. And he said, I don't believe it. I said, yeah. And I said, and there's your problem. I give you, because of my color, a piece of information and you don't believe it. But if somebody else gave you that information, you say, oh, maybe I need to look into it.
We have a long road to travel.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're on
Kevin,
it. Yeah.
Kevin,
started
may
the
I, may I
Yeah.
follow up on that just
Sure.
a minute? I didn't put it in the chat because I don't know how to spell it, but I would like to, as a white person, I would like to have it pointed out to me when I make those, well, I will call them inadvertently cultural comments, and let me know where I am, you know, going off the rails a little bit without writing me off as a racist. And now I'm not saying in a public meeting maybe, but when we are communicating, I would like to know where I am going wrong. And I'd like to be able to ask questions
Sure.
without being judged as negative or positive.
Well, Lucille, first, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. That is a step forward. And you know me, I believe well enough from our interaction that if I feel something, I will say something. But here's the thing that I'm asking you to do. Don't wait for somebody to tell you. Ask yourself the question as you are saying it. Is this prejudicial? Is this based on an assumption? Because until you internalize it, it doesn't matter. You can't wait for somebody else to tell you. If change is going to come, it's got to come from you and from within. Now, I'll help you. I have no problem doing it and would hope that you would help me, because I say some very inappropriate things at times. But
Thank you, Kevin, and thank everyone for your insightful questions. And I'd like to particularly also thank Mayor Roberts for her contribution this evening. It's nigh on to closing time, but before we do, I want to ask everybody to attend the upcoming Lunch with the League scheduled on February the 9th from 11:30 to 1. It's another Zoom presentation, but the featured speaker is Lisa Sorg, S-O-R-G. She's an environmental reporter with 22 years experience with the North Carolina Policy Watch. Evites will be coming out soon with more information, but please mark your calendars because Ms. Sorg is our Environment and Sustainability Committee selected speaker. So I know that's going to be a no miss event. Are there any other announcements before we close this evening? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no, and want to thank everybody.
I am sorry, this is Kelly, and I apologize. And I don't know if Reagan shared with you earlier, we want to announce that the Civics 101 registration is now open, and please share with your friends. That's such a great program that we offer.
Great, thank you, Kelly. That's wonderful. And Kevin, I'd like to say, if you could send me your schedule of events, I will communicate with our communications team and try to get that on our social media.
Sure.
And let people know, because it seems like we had a great turnout tonight. There's obviously a lot of interest in this. So I think people would like to know about the meetings and hearings.
No problem. I'll follow up with it.
Thank you. Thank everybody. And I guess if nothing else, we'll say good night. And thank you
Right.
again.
See you guys
Thanks,
soon.
Kevin. Thank you.
Good job, Kevin.
Thank you.